The wind cut through the marketplace like icy knives carrying dust and the smell of old metal. The alien widow stood in the middle of the crowd, holding her little girl's hand tightly. Her clothes were thin and torn, hardly enough to keep. Out the cold, she could feel every stare, every whisper. Traders in long coats watched her like hawks, their eyes not on her face, but on the bundle of cloth she carried. It was the last thing she owned, her wedding dress. Once it had been bright and beautiful, woven with threads that shimmered in the light, a gift from her husband before the war took him away. Now she was going to sell it, because her daughter had not eaten in 2 days. The little girl shivered. Beside her, clutching her mother's leg, her eyes were big, too big for her small face, and they were filled with hunger. The widow bent down, brushing the child's cheek with her hand, whispering that everything would be fine. But she knew. It was a lie. On this mining colony, nothing was fine for those without money. She stepped up to the first merchant, an alien with 3 eyes and a long snake-like neck. He looked at the dress with a crooked smile. "Old cloth," he hissed, shaking his head. "Not worth much." "It is worth more than you think," the widow said softly, keeping her voice calm. "It is made from rare fabric. You will not find another like it." The merchant laughed, a dry sound. "I will give you 2 credit chips. For it enough for a scrap of bread." Her stomach twisted. 2 chips would not be enough to feed her daughter for even 1 meal. She turned away, moving to another stall. One by one, the merchants refused to offer a fair price. Some mocked her, others ignored her completely. The marketplace grew colder, the wind sharper, but she kept going. Finally, an older merchant leaned forward and whispered, "If you want more money, you will have to sell something else, something men value more than cloth." His eyes ran over her body. She felt her face burn with shame. She grabbed her daughter's hand and walked away quickly, her heart pounding. The crowd seemed to close in around her, their faces hard, their voices cold. She could hear laughter behind her, but she didn't turn back. At the far end of the market, she found a buyer willing to give her 5 credit chips for the dress. It was far less than it was worth, but her daughter's lips were pale, and her small body trembled. She had no choice. With shaking hands, she handed over the dress. The merchant snatched it away, not even looking at her, and tossed her the chips. The fabric that once held memories of love and safety was gone, replaced by cold metal coins. She used the chips to buy a small packet of bread and a thin strip of dried meat. It wasn't much, but it was food. She tore the bread in half, giving the larger piece to her daughter, who ate it quickly, crumbs falling to the ground. Watching her eat filled the widow with both relief and sadness. Relief that her child would not go hungry tonight. Sadness because she knew tomorrow would bring the same struggle as they left the market. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows. Across the stalls, the cold grew worse. She pulled her daughter close, trying to keep her warm, but her own body was shaking. The streets of the colony were rough and dirty, filled with strangers who didn't care about the suffering of others. That was when she noticed him. A human stood leaning against a wall near the edge of the market. He was tall, wearing a thick jacket that looked warm enough to survive a snowstorm. His hair was dark, his face rough from years of work, and his eyes followed her quietly. Not with the hunger or cruelty of the merchants, but with something else, something she couldn't read. Her steps slowed for a moment. The human didn't move. He just kept watching her. She turned her gaze away, pulling her daughter along, but she could still feel his eyes on her back. They turned into a narrow street between 2 metal buildings. The shadows there were deeper, the wind quieter. Twice. She thought they were alone, until she heard footsteps behind them. Her body tensed. She spun around, and there he was. The human had followed. She stepped in front of her daughter, holding her arm out like a shield. "What do you want?" Her voice was sharper than she intended, but she didn't care. No one followed her without reason. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the small packet of bread in her hand, then at the thin clothes hanging from her shoulders. "You're freezing," he said finally, his voice low. "Where are you staying?" "That's none of your concern," she replied quickly. She didn't trust kindness. "Not here, not now. I have food, he said, taking a step closer. And heat. You and your daughter should come with me. Her heart raced. She had heard stories about humans. Some said they were dangerous, others said they were honorable. She had never met one before, but every instinct told her to keep her distance. We are fine, she lied. Even as her teeth chattered, the human's gaze dropped to the little girl, who was leaning against the wall, too tired to stand straight. Not fine, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. If you keep walking in this cold, she won't make it through the night. The widow's chest tightened, fear and pride pulling her in opposite directions. She wanted to tell him to leave, to take his strange offer somewhere else, but her daughter's small cough stopped the words in her throat. Before she could speak, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small thermal blanket. He held it out, his hands steady. Take it, he said simply. She hesitated, her eyes flicking between the blanket and his face. She saw no mockery in his eyes, no hidden greed. Only a calm patience, as if he already knew she would accept. Slowly she reached out and took the blanket, wrapping it around her daughter. The little girl's eyes closed, her breathing easing as the warmth spread through her. When the widow looked up again, the human was still watching her. But now there was something new in his expression, determination. You're coming with me, he said quietly, whether you trust me or not. And before she could decide, he turned and began walking, leaving her with a choice. Follow him into the unknown, or stay here and face the cold night with nothing left. The widow did not move at first. The human's words hung in the cold air, heavier than the blanket in her hands. Her daughter looked up at her, eyes still wide from the warmth, as if silently asking what they should do. The wind scraped against the metal walls, carrying the sound of distant shouting from the market. The human stopped a few steps ahead and turned his head slightly. His voice was calm, yet carried an unspoken command. If you want her to see another sunrise, follow me. She hated being told what to do, especially by a stranger, but the way he said it made her feel like refusing would be foolish. Still, she pulled her daughter closer and asked, "Why would you help us? You don't even know our names." The man didn't answer right away. His gaze shifted to the shadows at the end of the street. "Because I know what it's like to have no one," he said finally. Then he began walking again, his steps steady and unhurried. Every instinct told her to be careful. But she also knew. The cold was killing them slowly, and the thought of her daughter's small body lying still in the snow made her legs move. She followed, keeping a cautious distance. The streets grew quieter as they left the market behind. The buildings here were older, their metal walls rusted and patched in places. A faint smell of smoke drifted through the air. They passed only a few people, most of them wrapped tightly in cloaks, heads down. The human led them to a narrow alley between two tall structures. At the end stood a heavy door with faded paint. He placed his palm on a scanner, and the lock clicked open. Warm air spilled out, carrying the scent of cooked food. Her daughter's eyes lit up. The widow held her back a moment longer, glancing past the door. Inside, dim light revealed a small but clean space. A stove glowed in the corner, and a thick rug covered the metal floor. "Go inside," the human said. "It's safe." She stepped through the doorway, still clutching her daughter's hand. The warmth wrapped around them instantly, a soft contrast to the sharp cold outside. Her legs felt weak, and for a moment she almost forgot to be suspicious. The human closed the door behind them, removing his jacket and hanging it on a hook. Without another word, he moved to the stove and poured something from a pot into 2 cups. The smell of hot broth filled the room. "Sit," he said, nodding toward a small table. She hesitated, then guided her daughter to a chair. Fingers gripped the edge of the table as if afraid the food might disappear. The man placed 1 cup in front of the little girl and another before the widow. "Drink slowly," he said. "It's hot." "Ow!" Her daughter obeyed instantly, sipping the broth, her face relaxing with each swallow. The widow kept her hands around the warm cup but didn't drink yet. Her eyes stayed on the human. "What do you want in return?" she asked quietly. He looked at her without blinking. Nothing. She narrowed her eyes. No one gives something. For nothing. He leaned back slightly, his voice low. You're right. I want something, but not from you. I want to see your daughter survive. That's all. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Kindness from strangers usually came with a price, yet his expression held no greed, only a steady calm that made her uneasy in a different way. The man turned to the stove again, slicing bread and placing it on the table. Eat while you can. The weather will get worse tonight. She still didn't trust him completely, but the smell of the bread and the warmth in the room were breaking her resolve. Her daughter had already eaten half the slice before she even touched hers, between bites. The widow asked, "Why were you watching me at the market?" His jaw tightened, because there were eyes on you that meant trouble, some of those merchants. Don't just trade goods, they trade people. Her stomach turned. She remembered the older merchant's words and the way his eyes had lingered on her. She had brushed it off at the time, but now it felt like a shadow creeping closer. Shouldn't go back there, the human said firmly. Not without someone who can keep you safe. She set the bread down. And that someone is you. If you'll let it be, he replied. Silence settled for a moment. The only sound was her daughter's quiet chewing. Human's gaze stayed on the door as if expecting someone to knock. Finally, she said, if I agree to stay for tonight, then tomorrow we leave. We don't want to be a burden. He didn't argue, but his eyes told her he didn't believe it would be that simple. Later, after the little girl had fallen asleep wrapped in the blanket, the widow sat in the chair nearest the door. The human was checking a small device on the table, a scanner of some kind. His face was serious. What are you looking for? She asked. Movement outside, he said. Tracks in the snow that don't belong. Her chest tightened. You think someone followed us? I know someone did, he said without looking up. They saw you sell the dress. They saw what? You bought. And people like that don't just walk away. She swallowed hard, gripping the blanket tighter around herself. The human finally looked up, his voice quiet but firm. Stay here tomorrow, he said. Let me deal with anyone who comes. Her pride wanted to refuse, but the fear in her chest kept her silent. She didn't know why this stranger cared so much, yet something in her told her she couldn't walk away from his offer. Not yet. Outside, the wind howled against the walls, but inside, the air was warm. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something dangerous was moving closer, and that the human's offer might be the only shield she had left. The night outside was restless. The wind slammed against the metal walls, making them groan as if the whole building wanted to break apart. Inside, the small shelter was warm, but the widow could not sleep. Every time the wind howled, she thought of the market, the stairs, the whispers, and the warning in the human's voice. Her daughter slept peacefully on a small bed in the corner. Wrapped in the thermal blanket, child's tiny breaths were steady, each one proof she had survived another day. The widow sat in a chair near the table, her eyes fixed on the human, who was cleaning a short, heavy weapon on his lap. You expect trouble tonight? She said softly. He nodded without looking up. Not expect, no. Her heart thudded. Why us? He set the weapon down and met her eyes. Because people saw desperation in you. Desperation attracts the worst kind. They think you're easy to take. They think no one will stand in their way. And you? She asked. Why stand in their way? His answer came without hesitation. Because I've seen this happen before, and I won't watch it happen again. Before she could ask more, the shelter's lights flickered. Once, then returned to normal. He glanced toward the door. That's not the wind, he said. She rose from the chair, feeling a cold weight in her chest. What is it? Someone's testing the power, he replied, seeing if they can cut it. Her breath caught. The heat went out, the temperature inside would drop fast. Her daughter could not survive a night in the cold again. He moved to the window and peered through a narrow slit. His shoulders stiffened. Two of them standing across the street, waiting. Her instincts told her to run, but she knew there was nowhere to go. Streets were empty, the cold too dangerous. The human turned back to her, his voice calm, but firm. If anything happens, You take your daughter and hide in the back room. Lock the door and don't open it unless you hear my voice." She swallowed hard. "And you, I'll make sure they don't get inside." The minutes crawled by. Outside, the wind carried the sound of boots crunching in the snow. Then silence. Then a low murmur she couldn't understand. The human stood near the door, weapon ready, his eyes never leaving it. Then came the first knocks, low, deliberate. Echoing through the small space, the widow's hands tightened on the blanket around her shoulders. Her daughter stirred in her sleep, but didn't wake. "Who is it?" the human called. A rough voice answered. "Open up. We have business." "No business here," the human replied. The voice grew sharper. "You have something that belongs to us." The widow's stomach twisted. She knew they meant her. These were the same kind of men the human had warned about, collectors who dealt in more than debt. The human's voice was steady. "You're mistaken. Leave." A pause, then the sound of boots moving closer. "We'll be back," the voice said. The footsteps faded. The widow let out a slow breath, but the human shook his head. "They'll return, and not alone." She lowered her voice. "We should leave before they do." He studied her for a moment, then shook his head. "No. Out there, they'll catch you in minutes. Here, they'll have to go through me." She didn't know why his certainty made her feel safer, but it did. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't facing danger alone. He poured her another cup of hot broth, insisting she'll eat. "You'll need your strength," he said. Might not be easy. The night passed slowly. Every sound outside made her tense. Twice she thought she heard someone moving near the door, but each time the noise faded away. Eventually, exhaustion pulled at her eyes and she fell asleep in the chair. She woke to the smell of food. The human was at the stove cooking something that smelled far better than anything she had eaten in months. Her daughter sat at the table, already eating. Her cheeks flushed from the warmth. For a moment, it felt like a normal morning. But the human's watchful eyes and the rifle leaning against the wall reminded her it was not. "We have to make a plan," he said once she joined them. "They'll be back, maybe today." She nodded slowly. "And if they don't find us here, they'll look somewhere else." But they won't stop. Her mind raced. What do they want with us? Just to take what little we have? His jaw tightened. No, they'll want more, and I'm not letting that happen. She met his gaze and saw no doubt there, only the quiet. Promise that he meant every word, as the wind rattled the walls again. The widow realized something. This shelter was not just walls and warmth. It was the first place in years where someone was willing to stand in front of her instead of turning away. But outside, danger was moving closer, and the safety of this place could shatter at any moment. The knock came in the middle of the download, sharp and heavy enough to make the walls shudder. The widow froze with a cup in her hand, her daughter's small fingers gripping her sleeve. The human was already moving toward the door, his weapon resting easily in his hands, his eyes cold and alert. "Stay back," he told her without looking. "Keep her behind you." The voice outside was rough, the same she had heard last night. "Open up, human. We have business, and you're in." The human didn't answer. He leaned closer to the door, listening. Boots shuffled outside, more than 2 pairs this time. A low chuckle followed, then a second voice, deeper and crueler. "You've got something we want. Hand her over and we walk away." The widow's breath caught in her throat. Her arms tightened around her daughter. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The human's voice was calm, almost bored. "No one here belongs to you." There was a short pause, then the sound of something heavy striking the door. The metal rang like a bell. "Don't make this hard," the deep voice growled. "We're giving you one chance." The human stepped back from the door and looked at the widow. Back room. Now. She didn't argue this time. She pulled her daughter into the narrow back room, the air colder here, the light dim. She closed the door but didn't lock it. Part of her needed to hear what was happening. Outside, the pounding grew louder.
Last warning,
The deep voice shouted. The human's reply was quiet, but she heard every word. "You're out of warnings." A sudden crash shook the shelter. The front door burst inward, slamming against the wall. Heavy boots clanged on the metal floor, and she could hear the deep voice sneer. "Wrong move, human." There was no reply, only the sound of a quick, sharp movement and a grunt of pain. Then another thud, heavier, like a body hitting the floor. Someone cursed, and another pair of boots scrambled backward. "You think you can fight us all?" The rough voice from last. Knight snarled. The human's answer came like steel. "Try me." The room filled with the sounds of a fight boot scuffing, metal clanging, short bursts of breath. She heard one man shout, then choke, then silence. The fight was fast, brutal, and ended quicker than she expected. When the noise stopped, she pressed her ear to the door. The only sound was the wind outside. Then the human's voice, low but steady. "It's over. Come out." She opened the door slowly. The front room smelled faintly of burned metal. 2 bodies lay unconscious on the floor, weapons scattered near them. The human was standing near the broken door, his rifle lowered, his eyes still sharp. Her daughter clung to her, hiding her face. The widow's voice shook. "They won't stop." He nodded once. "I know." She stepped closer, glancing at the fallen men. "What now?" "We send a message," he said simply. "One they'll understand." He knelt beside the larger man, pulling a small device from his belt, a communicator. The human pressed a button and spoke in a calm, deadly tone. "Sent them to take something from me. They failed. Next time you come here, I won't send anyone back." There was no reply, only static. He dropped the communicator on the floor and crushed it under his boot. Her stomach twisted. "Oh, no. Hate you too. They already did," he said. "This changes nothing, except now they know I'm not an easy target." The cold wind poured through the broken doorway, making her shiver. He noticed and grabbed his jacket, placing it over her shoulders. "We'll fix the door. You'll be safe tonight." She looked at him, wanting to ask why he cared, why he had put himself in danger for someone he barely knew. But before she could speak, he turned to the unconscious men. "They'll wake up," she said. "They'll leave before they do," he replied. She frowned. "Why?" "Because I want them to tell the others exactly what happened here." He dragged the men outside, leaving them in the snow. When he returned, he set to work reinforcing the door with metal panels from a storage crate. She watched, him in silence, her mind spinning. He didn't just protect them, he was making sure anyone who thought about trying again would think twice. By the time the door was secure, the day was fading into a gray evening. The wind carried the scent of snow, and she knew the temperature would drop quickly. He sat down at the table, his face calm again. "They'll come back eventually," he said, "but not tonight." The widow sat across from him, her daughter curled up in her lap. "You risked your life for us. Twice." He didn't look at her. "I told you before. I've seen this before. I'm not letting it happen again." Her voice was quiet. "Someone did this to your family." His jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "They didn't make it." "I did." The silence between them was heavy, but not cold. She wanted to thank him, but the words felt too small for what he had done. That night, as her daughter slept again in the warm blanket, the widow lay awake on the small bed. The wind outside was softer now, almost distant, but she knew the danger wasn't gone. It was just waiting, and for the first time, she didn't feel entirely powerless against it. The first sound was not a knock this time. It was the crunch of boots in the snow. Many boots, moving in unison. The human was at the table, cleaning his rifle, when his head lifted sharply. He set the weapon down and crossed to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to look. "They're here," he said. The widow's stomach tightened. "How many?" "Enough to think they can win," he replied, his voice calm, almost steady in a way that made her heart race. "Stay in the back room. Take your daughter and do not come out unless I call you." She wanted to argue, but his tone left no space for questions. She scooped her daughter into her arms and hurried to the back room. Before closing the door, she caught one last look at him standing near the center of the room, checking his weapon, his eyes like stone. Outside, muffled voices shouted commands. Then a deep voice, louder than the rest, called out, "Hugh Manstep! Outside, you have one chance to hand them over." The human's reply was short. "Not happening." Pause. Then the sound of laughter from several throats. "You think you can stop us?" "I know I can," he said. The first blow came against the door, a heavy ram slamming into it. The reinforced panels shook, but held. Second blow followed, louder, and she could hear the faint grind of metal under pressure. From the back room, the widow clutched her daughter, every muscle tense. The little girl buried her face in her mother's chest, whispering that she was scared. The widow wanted to tell her it would be fine, but the words caught in her throat. Another crash shook the building. This time the door gave way, ripping from its hinges and clattering to the floor. A cold air and the scent of snow rushed inside. First man through barely took a step before the human's rifle barked once. The intruder dropped, sliding across the floor. Shouts erupted outside and more men surged forward. The fight was fast and brutal. The human moved like water, his rifle steady, his steps precise. Every shot found its mark. He ducked behind the table, using it as cover, then rose and fired again. The narrow entryway slowed them, forcing them to come through one or two at a time, and he used that to his advantage. A flash of metal in the corner of his eye, someone had slipped through the side window. The human swung around, catching the intruder with a hard strike from the rifle's stock. The man collapsed without a sound. From the back room, the widow could hear every shot, every grunt of effort. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She wanted to stay hidden, but when she heard the sound of breaking glass, instinct pulled her toward the door. She cracked it open just in time to see one of the attackers raising a weapon toward the human's back. Without thinking, she grabbed the heavy metal bar from the floor and swung it with all her strength. Connected with a sickening thud, and the man dropped. The human turned, eyes flashing. "I told you to stay back." "You're welcome," she said through heavy breaths. For a brief moment, his mouth twitched as if he might smile, but then more boots pounded against the metal floor, and his focus snapped forward again. They kept coming, but fewer now. The bodies on the floor and the blood and the snow outside were starting to make the survivors hesitate. The human used that hesitation, advancing with measured steps, forcing them back toward the open door. The deep voice from before shouted from outside, "Fall back, Will. Get them another time." The attackers retreated quickly, dragging their wounded. The human followed them to the doorway, but did not step into the open. He stood there, rifle in hand, watching until the last shadow disappeared into the swirling snow. Only then did he lower the weapon. The widow stepped forward, still gripping the metal bar. Her daughter peeked out from behind her, eyes wide. "They'll come again," the widow said quietly. He nodded. "Yes, but not soon. They lost more today than they expected." She glanced at the broken door, the scattered weapons, the snow, stained dark just beyond the threshold. "Could have been killed." He met her eyes. "So could you." The words hung between them for a long moment. Then he set the rifle down and began gathering the fallen weapons into a pile. "Use these. Next time they come, we'll be even more ready." That night, the shelter felt different. The wind outside still howled, but inside there was a sense of defiance. A feeling that the walls were stronger than before, not because of the metal, but because of the man who stood inside them. The widow sat at the table, her daughter asleep. Against her side, she watched the human work, reinforcing what was left of the doorway. He didn't look tired, though she knew he had to be. His focus never wavered, as if his mind was already on the next fight. For the first time, she realized something. This was not just about her and her daughter anymore. The moment he stood between them and danger, it became his fight too, and he was not the kind of man who lost. The fire in the stove burned low, casting a soft orange glow across the small shelter. Outside, the snow fell in thick sheets, muting the sounds of the colony beyond. Inside, the air was warm, but the widow could still feel a chill, not from the cold, but from the memory of the fight. Her daughter was asleep again, curled in a nest of blankets. The room was quiet except for the crackle of the flames. The human sat at the table, a half-cleaned weapon in front of him, though his hands had stopped moving. He was staring at the fire, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. "You haven't said a word since they left," the widow said softly. He didn't look at her. "I'm thinking about what?" His gaze stayed on the fire, about how close they came. She took a step closer. "They won't stop, will they?" He shook his head slowly. "No, they won't." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The widow sat down across from him, studying his face in the flickering light. "You've fought before," she said. "Just here, somewhere else." His eyes lifted to hers, and for the first time she saw something in them, something heavy, buried deep. "Yes. War," she asked. He nodded once, a long one. "I didn't walk away from it the same." Her hands folded on the table. "Is that why you helped us? Because you've seen what happens to people like me?" His eyes darkened. "More than that." She waited, sensing he was deciding whether to speak. Finally he leaned back, his voice lower now, almost as if he feared the words themselves. "I had a family once, a wife, a little boy. We lived on a frontier colony. Far from the core worlds. It wasn't safe, but it was ours." The widow's breath caught at the shift in his voice. The calm, unshakable tone he always carried was gone, replaced by something raw. "One night," he continued, "a raider group came through. They wanted food, weapons, and whatever else they could take. I wasn't home when they arrived. By the time I got back, the colony was burning. My wife and my boy, they were gone." The fire crackled louder in the silence that followed. The widow didn't speak, afraid her voice might break whatever thin control he had left. "I hunted those raiders for months," he said, his voice steady again but cold. "I found them, every last one, and I made sure they never touched another. Family." Her chest tightened. "And since then, I've kept moving," he said. "No home, no roots, just work and travel. It's easier that way." She looked down at the table, her fingers tracing the grain in the wood. "So when you saw us, I saw them," he finished for her. "I saw my family in the snow, hungry and alone. I wasn't going to walk away a second time." The widow swallowed hard. "You could have ignored us. It wasn't your fight." His eyes met hers, sharp and unwavering. "It became my fight the moment I saw your little girl's face."
Hey.
Breath shook, though she tried to keep it steady. No one had ever spoken about her and her daughter that way not since her husband died. Most people saw them as a burden, an inconvenience. But this man saw something else. "You've done more for us in 2 days than anyone has in years," she said quietly. He shrugged. "I'm not doing it for thanks." "Then why?" His answer was simple. "Because I couldn't save them." "I can save you." The widow felt the weight of those words settle in her chest. She wanted to tell him that he already had, that every moment since they stepped into this shelter had been a lifeline, but her voice would not come. They sat in silence for a long time, fire's glow painting their faces in warm light. Outside, the wind eased and the snow softened to a gentle fall. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost hesitant. "If we stay with you, it will bring more danger." He didn't hesitate. "It's already here, and I'd rather face it with you safe under my roof than out there in the cold." She studied him, searching for any sign of hesitation. There was none. His resolve was as solid as the reinforced door. Her hand brushed against the table, close. To his, but not touching. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she said. For the first time since they met, she saw the edge of a smile touch his face, not wide, but real.
Either do you.
That night, she lay beside her sleeping daughter and listened to the quiet hum of the shelter. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like prey waiting for the next attack. She felt like someone was standing watch, someone who wouldn't let the dark swallow them. But even as she drifted toward sleep, she knew the danger was not gone. It was waiting, just beyond the snow, and sooner or later it would come again, and when it did, they would face it together. The sun rose slowly over the mining colony, casting pale light across the snow-covered streets. The storm had passed during the night, leaving everything quiet, almost peaceful. But inside the small shelter, no one was fooled peace. Here was always temporary. The widow woke first. Her daughter was still sleeping beside her, her small hand curled around the blanket. For a moment, the widow simply watched her breathe, letting the warmth of the morning settle in. It had been so long since she had woken without fear pressing. Against her chest, in the main room, the human was already awake. He was sitting at the table, cleaning his rifle with the same steady focus he had shown every day since they arrived. But today there was something different in his posture readiness, as if he was waiting for something. "You didn't sleep," she said. Stepping into the room, he glanced up briefly, then returned to his work. "I slept enough," she knew. What that meant, he had been awake most of the night, listening for footsteps in the snow, keeping watch while they rested. She crossed to the stove and began heating water, the simple act making the shelter feel almost like a home. "We can't live like this forever," she said softly. "Always waiting for the next attack?" "No," he agreed. "Which is why today, we changed that." She looked at him, uncertain. "How?" "Set the rifle aside. By making it clear this is not a place they can come back to. Ever." Her breath caught. "You mean, go to them?" He nodded once. "End it before they decide to try again." The thought filled her with both relief and fear. Relief because she knew he was right sooner or later, the danger had to be confronted. Fear because confronting it meant stepping into their world. "Away from the safety of these walls? Will you take us with you?" she asked. His eyes softened slightly, not into danger. "But once it's done, we'll leave this colony together. There are places out there where you won't have to sell the clothes off your back to feed your child." Her chest tightened at his words. "And you'll stay with us?" He didn't answer right away, but when he did, it was with quiet certainty. "If you'll have me." By mid-morning, he was ready. He strapped on his gear, checked his weapons, and pulled a heavy coat from the wall. The widow stood by the doorway, her daughter holding her hand. "Be careful," she said. "I always am," he replied. She wanted to say more, but before she could, he stepped out into the cold. The door closed behind him, leaving only the sound of the wind. The hours that followed were slow, each minute dragging longer than the last. She kept busy, repairing a tear in the blanket, heating broth for when he returned. Her daughter played quietly on the rug, humming to herself. Then, as the light began to fade, the sound of footsteps came from outside, steady, unhurried. The door opened, and the human stepped inside. His coat was dusted with snow, his face unreadable. "It's done," he said simply. She didn't ask for details. She could see the truth in the way he carried himself, in the quiet finality of his voice. The threat was gone. That night, the shelter felt lighter. The air still smelled faintly of gunpowder and cold air, but there was no edge of fear in the silence. For the first time since she had met him, the widow allowed herself to believe they might actually be safe. The next morning, they began packing. The human moved with purpose, fitting supplies into a travel bag, checking the weather on a small handheld device. The widow folded the few clothes they still had, wrapping her daughter's things in cloth. "Where will we go?" she asked. "Somewhere warmer," he said. "Somewhere with work and people who don't look at you like your prey." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "That sounds impossible." "Not impossible," he said, "just hard too." Fined by midday, they were ready. The human stood at the door, looking out over the snow-covered colony one last time. The widow stood beside him, her daughter holding both their hands. "Do you ever miss where you came from?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "I miss the people, not the place. Places can be rebuilt. People can't." She looked at him then, really looked at the lines of his face, steadiness in his eyes, the way he always positioned himself between them and the world outside. In that moment, she realized she didn't just trust him, she needed him. And she suspected he needed them too. They stepped out into the cold together. The sky was clear, the snow glittering under the pale sun. The path ahead was uncertain. But for the first time, it didn't feel hopeless as they walked. The little girl squeezed the human's hand and looked up at him. "Are you my father now?" The widow glanced at him quickly, unsure how he would respond. He looked down at the girl, his expression softening. "If you want me to be." The girl smiled and nodded, and for the first time since they had met, the human smiled, too a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. The widow's heart ached in a way that was both painful and warm. They had nothing certain, nothing promised, but they had each other. And that was more than they had yesterday, and as the colony faded behind them, swallowed by snow and distance, she knew they were not just leaving danger behind, they were stepping into a new beginning,